That was close,
Jim said after blowing off the head of the Bagadon with his shotgun.
I just wish we could have avoided it. At least we're far enough away from the house,
Ben said.
They shouldn't be able to follow us anyway.
Part of his job as Jim's backup was to remove their scents with magic as they traveled through the suburb. If any of the Bagadons happened to move over the crisscross paths the men had taken between the houses, there was no way they could track them. Jim didn't waste any time checking out the gory mess and kept moving up the hill towards Mary's house with Ben in tow. Every few seconds, his deputy stopped and laid down a thick carpet of elemental magic behind them with a wave of his hands. His mother was an earth elemental, which automatically made him one, so this was simple, quick work for him. Fortunately, Sally's powerful protection spells included creating an illusion that befuddled the minds of the Bagadons. Unless the creatures looked directly at them, they would think that the men were but a mirage or some innocuous movement caused by the wind inside the fog. Throughout their journey into the suburb, Jim had allowed his mind to embrace and remember his very long-lost past. There had only ever been 4 Aeons since the dawn of time, and he was the last. The other 3 had died in the true Great Wars during the early ages of their existence. The last war had ended when each tribe's territorial boundaries had finally been agreed upon by their leaders, and everlasting peace had settled over the earth. It was only in the last 300 years that tensions had gradually escalated again between the warrior tribes and those who wanted things to remain the way they'd been since the end of the last war. But unfortunately, with the rapid and aggressive expansion of humans and the steady shrinking of their territories, many of the more peaceful tribes had started paying attention to the growing dissension among their kind and their hatred for what the humans were doing to Untuis. The tribal leader of the Bagadons, one of the oldest among their kind, had encouraged the other tribes to take action. And that's why the last Aeon had been awoken in preparation for another potential war. But it was possible that the Kuatha could stop it from happening this very night.
Jim, watch out!
Ben hissed under his breath. They both quickly hunkered behind a parked vehicle, but unfortunately the creatures were upwind from them and had picked up their scents like the bloodhounds they were. Growling, hissing and sniffing the air, they ran straight towards the men who raised their shotguns over the hood of the car. The head of one Bagadon disappeared with a sickening splat, while the other got a gaping hole in its chest and was slammed back by the force of Ben's shot. The dual blasts were unfortunate but had to be done. Jim told him to follow him over the low fence of a nearby house, and they jogged down the side to a garden at the bottom of the backyard that led onto the narrow road behind the block, where the garbage truck emptied the bins once a week. They reached the end of the road and paused behind a tall shrub to check the street where they were about to cross. Loud snarls were heard from the direction of the dead Bagadons, and it sent them running across the street into the front yard of another house. Stopping behind a tall hedge, Jim watched Ben cover their tracks again. Magic was quite normal to him now, but the fact that only a couple of hours ago he had been just another human being getting on with his job in what he thought was a nice, quiet, normal town was astonishing and quite humorous.
"We good?"
he asked, when the young man rubbed his fingers together to let go of the spell.
"Yes, sir."
Ben picked up his shotgun and continued to confidently follow the Aeon. The quaint two-story house came into view the next street over, and Ben and Jim paused to observe it from behind a tree before approaching. Closing his eyes for a moment, Jim opened all his senses and sent them out ahead of him to scour the territory they were about to enter. The knowledge to do this had come to him the first time he was deciding which direction they should go in, and he had just gone with the flow, and had tried not to let his doubts and fear of the unknown stop his innate gifts from fully expressing themselves. Jim sensed nothing threatening nearby, only two occupants inside the house that were brimming with elemental magic.
"They're both inside and the area is clear,"
he told Ben. They ran across the street to pass through the front gate and headed down the side to the backyard. The remains of a woman were seen first, then smelled, and Jim waited for poor Ben to finish throwing up in a big flower pot before they entered the open back door and slipped into the kitchen. Jim closed and locked the door, then told Ben to wait there while he checked the sitting room. Another smaller mess lay on the carpet beside the dining room table, and Jim recognized the remains of a small dog. Even though he sensed no threat in or around the house, Jim still raised his gun and paid attention to his instinct.
"Shelley, it's Sheriff Jim Sutter and a deputy,"
he called out.
"The Sha Shas sent us."
He approached the front door, then turned to look up the stairs. A young woman was looking down at him with her arms outstretched, and her hands were glowing blue and crackled with energy. He quickly lowered his weapon and held up his other hand.
"I am the Aeon and I'm here to get Mary to the ritual site."
Ben came to stand beside him and waved, and she released a long trembling sigh and released the magic.
"Can we come upstairs?"
Yeah.
Shelley said, and tried not to cry with relief. It had been a very scary day, and her fear for Mary was getting the better of her. But if the Aeon was here, then she had faith that everything might just turn out okay.
Nice to finally meet you in person, Aeon.
She greeted him with a handshake.
"Call me Jim,"
he said with a warm smile.
"Is Mary okay?"
Yes, thank the Creator. She hid inside the hideaway I made for her so the Bagadons couldn't reach her, although they tried.
She pointed to the scratch marks along the walls and skirting boards outside her bedroom.
She was such a brave girl.
The last was said with tears in her eyes, and the sheriff gave her shoulder a squeeze.
"I'll look after her, I promise."
Thank you, Aeon. Sorry, Jim. She's asleep at the moment, so please don't wake her until we have to go. She's exhausted.
He gave her a nod before opening the bedroom door to look at Mary.
Glad you're here too, Ben.
She said, and gave him a warm hug.
"Everything's gonna be okay,"
he said.
"The Aeon is here and Sally will be following us shortly."
That's good. I've already packed a backpack for the two of us for the journey. Time grows short, so we need to get going.
Jim hid a smile. The Kawatha had been one of the three most powerful races, and were an important influence in negotiating peace between the tribes and ending aeons of war. They had distinct, bold personalities, and this had carried over when they'd shapeshifted into humans. Innately self-assured, with strong characters and no-nonsense attitudes, they dominated society in Hallow Grove and always took up the leadership positions in the town. Like mayor, sheriff, school principal, head of the school committee, and the town council. This way they could keep a close watch over the Bagadon changelings and shapeshifters, and also protect the vulnerable humans. It had worked well for over 100 years, but during the last few decades, the Bagadons had been growing impatient and unsettling the calm in Hallow Grove. This was around the same time Jim was recovering from getting shot in the city, and Marie had urged him to either leave the force or find another way to be a cop where he wasn't under constant threat of dying on the job. The way the perfect job had appeared during his very first online search had made it clear to Jim that the Kawatha had been instrumental in getting him to Hallow Grove. It also told him that he had been watched over his entire life, and his job as a law enforcement officer had prepared him in case he'd ever be needed again. He now knew that he had lived many lifetimes as a protector of humans in one form or another.
Well, we are ready to go when you are,
Jim said.
Ben and I will wait downstairs for you and make sure the perimeter is safe before we leave.
Thank you, Jim. Help yourselves to food if you're hungry. Can you give me about 10 minutes to get Mary ready?
Sure thing. Ben, let's get some grub. We need to replenish our energy before the trip.
Yes, sir, Ben said, and followed the Ain downstairs into the kitchen. While Jim made 2 big sandwiches for them with ham, mustard, pickles and cheese, his favorite, Ben stood at the back door and kept his eyes and ears on their surroundings. Jim called to him when the food was ready and they ate and drank bottled water, while Ben stood at the back door and Jim stood peeking out the front. They had just finished eating when Jim heard Shelley on the stairs, and he moved his shotgun behind him and waited at the bottom with a smile for the little girl, who looked a bit out of sorts after her nap.
Mary, say hello to Jim.
Shelley was curious to see her daughter's reaction to the Aeon. Sally must have awoken him only a short while ago because she sensed that his formidable power was still expanding. Jim held out his hand.
Howdy, Mary. Is there anything I can do for you before we go on our trip?
Mary regarded the tall man curiously from her mommy's arms. There was something different about him than all the other adults she knew. Even Ben and Mommy.
Hi.
She said shyly and shook his hand.
Mommy said we're going to the forest. Are you and Ben coming with us?
We are,
Jim said.
Is that okay? We are here to protect you and get to Aunt Sally.
Jim waited while Mary processed the information and felt a curious connection to her, like his energy was making contact with her heart and spirit and creating a bond between them. He was surprised when he sensed an astonishing amount of energy pulsing inside her, and he suddenly understood who she was and what the ritual was going to do for Untuis and all the beings that lived on her.
Okay,
Mary said, deciding she liked him. She felt so much better now that Mommy was home and Ben and the shiny man were here. Jim grinned.
Good girl. I have to protect you both. So Shelley, you carry Mary and I'll carry your backpack.
He'd seen it near the back door in the kitchen. No, Jim, let me carry it, Ben said. You need to take point and I'll be at your 6 behind Mary and Shelley. All right then, let's get to the back door. The quickest route to the forest is up Connor Drive and then across David Laney's plot. When you get tired, Shelley, hand Mary over to me, okay? Shelley nodded and followed him into the kitchen. She was immensely grateful that Sally had sent the Aeon to escort them to the ritual site. There were very few ancient ones who would dare confront an Aeon and live to tell about it. If the Kawatha was successful today, then Untuis, the humans and the ancient ones would forever live in peace and harmony. Before Jim exited, he looked outside with his human and preternatural senses. Their path was clear, and with a prayer to the Creator to watch over them, the 4 beings, all powerful in their own right, left the house and headed towards their destinies.